Husband made me a cup of coffee which had a very strange smell. I swapped mugs with my sister-in-laws, and the morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of our modest kitchen, casting delicate shadows on the worn wooden table. It was a typical Sunday, a day meant for lazy breakfasts and quiet moments before the chaos of the week resumed. I sat at the table, cradling my hands around the warm mug that Daniel had just placed in front of me. The aroma wafted up, but instead of the comforting scent of roasted coffee beans, there was something off about it, sharp, almost medicinal. I glanced up at Daniel, who stood by the counter with his back to me, rinsing out the coffee pot. His shoulders were tense, though he tried to appear casual as he hummed an unfamiliar tune under his breath. Something about his demeanor made my stomach churn, not just the strange smell emanating from the cup, but the way he seemed overly focused on mundane tasks, like avoiding eye contact. "Daniel," I said softly, trying not to let suspicion creep into my voice, "did you add anything unusual to this coffee?" He turned halfway, offering a lopsided smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Unusual? No, nothing unusual. Just your usual brew." His tone was light, dismissive even, but I caught the flicker of unease in his expression before he quickly looked away again. My heart pounded erratically against my ribs. This wasn't right. For years, we'd shared countless cups of coffee together without incident. Why now? Why today? A cold dread settled over me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I couldn't bring myself to take a sip. Instead, I pushed the mug slightly forward, pretending to adjust its position while scanning the room for some distraction, some excuse to avoid drinking it. That's when Sarah walked in. Sarah, my sister-in-law, breezed through the doorway with her characteristic energy. She carried 2 mugs, one for herself and one for her husband, Jake, who trailed behind her looking half asleep. Her presence immediately brightened the space, filling it with chatter and laughter. She set the extra mug down beside mine, steam curling invitingly from its surface. Without thinking, I swapped them. It happened so fast that no one noticed, the exchange swift and seamless. As soon as the fresh, familiar scent of coffee reached my nose, relief washed over me. Whatever was wrong with Daniel's concoction, I wouldn't have to deal with it directly. Not yet, anyway. But then guilt hit me like a wave. What was I doing? Why did I feel compelled to switch drinks? Was I being paranoid? Or worse, was there actually something sinister lurking beneath the surface of what should have been an ordinary act of domesticity? Sarah plopped down across from me, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside me. "Morning, sleepyhead," she teased, nudging Jake playfully as he slumped into the chair next to her. He grunted in response, reaching for the mug she'd brought him. Meanwhile, Sarah picked up the other mug, the one originally intended for me, and took a long sip. And froze. Her brow furrowed, lips pursed slightly as if tasting something unexpected. Then she glanced at me, confusion clouding her usually vibrant features. "Is this yours?" she asked hesitantly, holding up the mug. I felt my throat tighten. "No, it's..." I stopped short, unsure how to explain without sounding accusatory or insane. "I thought it might be stronger than usual," I lied lamely, forcing a weak smile. "Figured I'd try yours instead." She nodded slowly, still studying me with those piercing green eyes. There was a moment of silence between us, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, she shrugged and set the mug aside. "Well, it tastes fine to me," she said lightly, though her gaze lingered on me a second longer than necessary. The rest of breakfast passed in a blur. Conversation flowed easily enough among everyone except me. Every bite of toast felt dry and tasteless, every sip of coffee bitter despite knowing it wasn't the same drink Daniel had prepared. My thoughts spiraled endlessly, replaying the events of the morning over and over again. Why had I reacted so strongly? Was I imagining things? Or was there truly something amiss? After the meal, Sarah announced she needed help folding laundry upstairs, pulling me along with her under the pretense of catching up. Once we were alone in the spare bedroom, surrounded by piles of clothes, she turned to me with a serious expression. "What's going on, Emma?" she demanded gently, folding a sweater with practiced ease. "You've been acting weird all morning." I hesitated, torn between confiding in her and dismissing everything as mere paranoia. But the words spilled out before I could stop them. "It's Daniel," I admitted quietly, staring at my hands. "He made me coffee earlier, and it smelled strange. Like, really strange. And when I asked him about it, he acted all nervous." So I switched mugs with yours because I didn't want to drink it. Sarah paused mid-fold, her brows knitting together. Strange how? I don't know, I whispered, shaking my head. Sharp, chemical almost. Not like coffee at all. She frowned deeply, setting the folded sweater aside. Emma, are you sure you're not jumping to conclusions? Maybe he accidentally used the wrong grounds or spilled something in it. I wish that's all it was, I murmured, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. But it's not just the coffee. Lately, he's been acting different, distant, secretive. He stays late at work more often, takes calls outside, and sometimes he doesn't come home until after midnight. And now this. My voice broke, and I buried my face in my hands. Sarah wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. Hey, it's okay, she soothed. We'll figure this out. Together. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to lean into her comfort, drawing strength from her unwavering support. But deep down, I knew this wasn't something easily resolved. If my suspicions proved true, if Daniel really had tampered with my drink, it raised terrifying possibilities. Could he be hiding something far darker than infidelity or betrayal? Something that jeopardized not only our marriage but my very safety? As the day wore on, I found myself watching Daniel more closely than ever. Each movement, each word, became fodder for analysis. Did his forced smiles mask guilt? Were his lingering glances filled with regret, or something else entirely? Yet despite my scrutiny, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial, a clue hidden in plain sight. Later that evening, after Sarah and Jake had left and the house fell silent once more, Daniel approached me cautiously. He held another steaming mug in his hand, extending it toward me with a tentative smile. Thought you might want another cup, he offered, his voice tinged with uncertainty. This time, I promise it's normal. I stared at the mug, my pulse quickening. Memories of the morning flooded back, and I shook my head instinctively. No thank you, I replied, my tone firmer than I intended. I'm fine. His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of hurt. Okay, he said softly, retreating to the couch where he sank heavily, staring blankly at the television screen. Alone in the kitchen, I gripped the edge of the counter, struggling to steady my breathing. Doubt clawed at me relentlessly. Was I overreacting? Or was I protecting myself from something unimaginable? Either way, I knew one thing for certain, I couldn't ignore this any longer. The following days passed in a haze of tension and unanswered questions. Daniel seemed determined to make amends, showering me with small gestures of affection, bringing me flowers, cooking dinner, initiating conversations about our future. But his efforts only deepened my unease. They felt calculated, almost rehearsed, as if he were trying to distract me from probing further. Meanwhile, Sarah remained steadfast by my side, urging me to trust my instincts. Together, we devised a plan to uncover the truth. We decided to stage a scenario where I would pretend to drink the suspicious coffee while secretly disposing of it elsewhere. If Daniel reacted differently, or if anything unusual occurred, we'd have tangible evidence to confront him with. On the designated morning, I woke early, nerves frayed but resolve firm. As Daniel busied himself in the kitchen preparing breakfast, I slipped outside, dumping the contents of the previous night's reheated coffee onto the garden soil. Returning indoors, I joined him at the table, feigning nonchalance as I sipped water disguised in the same mug. Nothing happened initially. Daniel chatted amiably about his plans for the day, his demeanor relaxed and seemingly genuine. But as the hours ticked by, subtle changes began to emerge. He grew increasingly agitated, checking his phone obsessively and pacing the living room whenever I entered. By afternoon, his behavior bordered on erratic, culminating in a heated argument over something trivial. You're hiding something. I snapped finally, unable to contain my frustration. Stop lying to me. He froze, shock registering on his face before morphing into anger. What are you talking about? I haven't done anything wrong. Then why do you keep acting so strangely? I countered, advancing toward him. Why does your coffee smell like chemicals? Why are you always on edge lately? His jaw tightened, and for a fleeting instant, I saw fear flash in his eyes. Fear and guilt. Before he could respond, however, a sharp knock echoed through the house. We both turned toward the door, startled. Standing on the threshold was a man in a suit, badge gleaming on his belt. Behind him loomed two uniformed officers. "Mr. and Mrs. Harper?" the detective began, his tone grave. "We need to speak with you regarding a matter of utmost importance." My world tilted sideways as comprehension dawned. Whatever secrets Daniel harbored, they extended far beyond our household, and the implications terrified me. The air in the room seemed to thicken as the detective stepped inside, his presence commanding and unsettling. Daniel's face went pale, almost ghostly, while I stood frozen, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The officers followed him in, their boots clicking against the hardwood floor, each step echoing ominously in the silence that had fallen over our home. "Can we help you?" Daniel asked, his voice strained but attempting to sound calm. He moved slightly in front of me, as if shielding me from whatever was about to unfold. But instead of reassurance, his action only deepened my unease. Why did he feel the need to protect me now? Or was he trying to control the narrative? The detective introduced himself as Detective Harris, pulling out a small notebook from his coat pocket. His eyes flicked between Daniel and me, assessing us with practiced precision. "We're investigating an incident involving substances found at your workplace," he said, directing his words toward Daniel. "Specifically, traces of a chemical compound linked to illegal activity." My breath hitched, and I instinctively reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. Illegal activity? What on earth could he be talking about? My mind raced through fragmented possibilities, none of them good. I glanced at Daniel, searching his expression for answers, but all I saw was a mask of forced composure cracking under pressure. "What kind of substance are we talking about?" Daniel asked, his tone measured but laced with tension. His fingers twitched at his sides, betraying his attempt to appear unfazed. Detective Harris didn't mince words. "A highly toxic industrial solvent. It's not something typically found outside specialized facilities, and yet, traces were discovered in waste containers traced back to your department." I felt the blood drain from my face. Toxic solvent? Could that explain the strange smell in the coffee Daniel made me? Was this why he'd been acting so strangely lately? My stomach churned as the pieces began falling into place, forming a horrifying picture I wasn't ready to confront. "I don't understand," Daniel stammered, his voice rising slightly. "This has nothing to do with me. I haven't handled any chemicals recently. You must have the wrong person." Harris raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by the protest. "That's what we're here to determine. We've received credible information suggesting otherwise. And given the circumstances..." He trailed off, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. "Circumstances." I interjected, finding my voice despite the knot of dread tightening in my throat. "What circumstances?" The detective turned his attention to me, his gaze softening ever so slightly. "Mrs. Harper, have you noticed anything unusual about your husband's behavior recently? Any changes in routine or habits that struck you as odd?" My mouth went dry. How much should I say? Should I tell him about the coffee? About the late nights and secretive phone calls? Before I could decide, Daniel cut in sharply. "Don't answer that, Emma," he snapped, his composure shattering completely. He turned to glare at Harris, his fists clenched at his sides. "You can't just come into our home and interrogate my wife like this. Whatever allegations you're making, they're baseless." Harris remained unfazed, his expression cool and professional. "Mr. Harper, if you're innocent, cooperating will only work in your favor. Obstruction won't help anyone, least of all your family." Family. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore, it was about us. Our life together. Everything we'd built was teetering on the edge of collapse, and I didn't know how to stop it. After what felt like an eternity, Harris handed Daniel a card. "We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow morning for further questioning. Until then, consider yourself under investigation." With that, he signaled to the officers, who nodded curtly before following him out the door. As soon as they were gone, the house felt suffocatingly quiet. Daniel sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. For a moment, I thought he might cry, but when he looked up, his eyes were blazing with anger. "How could you let them talk to you like that?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "You shouldn't have said anything." I stared at him, incredulous. "Are you serious right now? They're accusing you of being involved in something dangerous, and you expect me to stay silent? Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I'd ignore the fact that you've been lying to me?" His jaw tightened, and he looked away, refusing to meet my gaze. "You don't understand," he muttered, almost to himself. "It's complicated." "Then explain it to me." I shot back, my voice breaking. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision. "Explain why you've been acting like a stranger these past few weeks. Explain why you made me coffee that smelled like poison. Explain why detectives just showed up at our door accusing you of God knows what." He flinched at my words, guilt etched across his features. Finally, after a long pause, he sighed deeply, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Fine," he said quietly. "You want the truth? Here it is. Someone at work set me up. Someone planted evidence to make it look like I'm involved in things I know nothing about." I blinked, stunned. "Set you up? Who would do that? And why?" He hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I got too close to uncovering something big. Something they didn't want anyone to find out." The room spun around me as his confession sank in. Too close to what? What kind of secrets could possibly lead to this nightmare? My thoughts spiraled, connecting dots I hadn't dared to consider before. The late-night calls, the secrecy, the strange coffee, it all pointed to one chilling conclusion. Daniel wasn't just caught in someone else's web, he was tangled in it far deeper than he was letting on. "But why involve me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why bring this into our home?" His eyes softened, filled with remorse. "I never wanted you to get hurt, Emma. That's why I tried to keep you out of it. But now..." He shook his head, looking defeated. "Now, I don't know how to fix this." Before I could respond, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was Sarah. She burst in without waiting for an invitation, her face flushed with urgency. "Emma, we need to talk," she said, glancing briefly at Daniel before pulling me aside. Her grip on my arm was firm, her voice low and urgent. "I did some digging after you told me about the coffee. Remember how I took a sip of it earlier? Well, I saved the rest in a jar. I sent it to a friend who works in a lab. The results just came back." My heart skipped a beat. "And..." Her expression darkened. "It's not coffee. Not entirely, anyway. There's a trace of chloroform mixed in." Chloroform. The word reverberated in my mind like a gunshot. Chloroform, a chemical used to render people unconscious. My knees buckled, and Sarah caught me before I could fall. Daniel heard her words and paled even further, realization dawning on his face. "Oh God," he whispered, sinking back onto the couch. "They're using you to get to me." "Who's they?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fury and fear. "Who's doing this to us?" He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he buried his face in his hands again, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sarah stepped forward, her tone resolute. "We need to go to the police. Now. Whoever is behind this isn't going to stop until they finish whatever twisted game they're playing." But as we prepared to leave, a car pulled up outside. Through the window, I saw headlights illuminating the driveway, and the silhouette of a figure stepping out, holding something metallic that gleamed in the dim light. The metallic glint caught my eye first, a flash of silver in the dim glow of the porch light. My breath hitched as I strained to see more clearly through the curtains, but the figure remained partially obscured by shadows. Whoever it was moved with deliberate slowness, each step echoing ominously against the quiet night. "Stay here," Sarah whispered urgently, her grip tightening on my arm. She positioned herself between me and the window, her protective instincts kicking into high gear. "Don't make a sound." But it was too late. A sharp rap on the door shattered the fragile calm that had momentarily settled over us. Daniel shot up from the couch, his face etched with panic. He glanced at me, then at Sarah, before finally resting his gaze on the front door. His hands trembled visibly as he took a hesitant step forward. "I'll answer it," he said quietly, though there was no conviction in his voice. It sounded more like a plea than a declaration. "No." I hissed, grabbing his wrist to stop him. "You can't trust anyone right now, not after everything that's happened." He hesitated, torn between fear and some misplaced sense of obligation. Finally, he nodded reluctantly, retreating back toward the living room while Sarah moved cautiously toward the door. She peered through the peephole, her body tense as a bowstring. After a moment, she turned to me, her expression unreadable. "It's Jake," she murmured, confusion flickering across her features. "But something's off." "Jake? My brother-in-law? What could he possibly be doing here so late at night?" The timing felt far too coincidental, especially given the storm of revelations we'd just endured. I exchanged a wary glance with Sarah, who seemed equally unsettled. "Let him in." I mouthed silently, unsure if I even wanted an answer. She hesitated for a beat longer, then unlocked the door and cracked it open just wide enough to peer outside. Sure enough, there stood Jake, looking disheveled and out of breath. His usual easy-going demeanor was gone, replaced by an intensity that bordered on desperation. In one hand, he clutched what appeared to be a small leather satchel. In the other, he held a flashlight whose beam wavered erratically. "Sarah, thank God," he blurted, pushing past her without waiting for an invitation. His eyes darted around the room, landing briefly on Daniel before settling on me. "We need to talk. Now." "What are you doing here?" Sarah demanded, closing the door behind him. Her tone was sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. "And why do you look like you've been running from someone?" Jake ignored her question, instead striding directly toward me. He thrust the satchel into my hands, his movements frantic. "Take this. Hide it somewhere safe. Don't let anyone see it, especially not them." "Them?" I repeated, my voice barely audible. My fingers tightened reflexively around the satchel, its weight heavier than expected. "Jake, what is going on?" Before he could respond, Daniel stepped forward, his expression darkening. "What are you hiding, Jake? If you're involved in whatever mess I'm caught up in, you need to tell us now." Jake's jaw clenched, and for a fleeting moment, I saw anger flare in his eyes. But it vanished almost instantly, replaced by a mix of guilt and resolve. "I didn't ask for any of this," he muttered, running a hand through his already messy hair. "But when I found out what they were planning, I couldn't stay quiet anymore." "Planning what?" Sarah interjected, her voice rising. "Jake, you're scaring us. Just spit it out." He took a deep breath, steadying himself before speaking again. "It's about Daniel's job. About the chemicals, and the setup. Someone's using him as a scapegoat to cover their tracks. But it goes deeper than that. Much deeper." My stomach churned as I braced myself for whatever bombshell he was about to drop. "Who, Jake? Who's behind this?" His gaze shifted uneasily between all of us before finally settling on Daniel. "Your boss, Rick. He's been laundering money through your department for months, using shipments of industrial solvents to smuggle cash overseas. When you started asking questions about discrepancies in the inventory logs, he panicked. That's when he decided to frame you." The room fell deathly silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Daniel staggered backward, collapsing onto the couch as if the ground beneath him had crumbled away. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with disbelief. "That bastard," he whispered hoarsely, shaking his head. "He promised me a promotion if I kept quiet about the irregularities. I thought he was testing my loyalty, not trying to destroy me." Jake nodded grimly. "Rick knew you'd eventually figure it out. So he planted evidence to make it look like you were complicit. And when Emma started noticing things," his voice trailed off, his gaze shifting to me. "That's when they decided to involve her. To keep you both distracted and vulnerable." A cold shiver ran down my spine as the implications sank in. The coffee laced with chloroform wasn't just a random act of sabotage, it was a calculated move to incapacitate me, or worse. They weren't just targeting Daniel, they were coming after our entire family. "But why would they target you, Jake?" Sarah asked, stepping closer to her husband. Her voice was softer now, tinged with concern. "What does this have to do with you?" Jake hesitated, guilt flashing across his face. "Because I work security at Daniel's company. I saw things, I overheard conversations I shouldn't have. At first, I thought I could ignore it, pretend I didn't know anything. But then Rick approached me. He offered me a cut of the profits if I helped him tighten the screws on Daniel. Make sure he stayed trapped." "You refused," I guessed, piecing together the fragments of his story. He nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah. And that's when they started threatening Sarah, telling me they'd hurt her if I didn't cooperate. His voice cracked, raw emotion spilling out. I couldn't risk losing her. So I played along long enough to gather proof. Everything's in that satchel. Sarah stared at him, her expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. You should have told me, she said softly, her voice trembling. Instead of keeping secrets, you should have trusted me. I wanted to protect you, Jake replied, his own voice breaking. But now, I don't know how much longer I can. As the gravity of the situation settled over us, a deafening roar split the night, a car engine revving violently outside. We froze, our collective attention snapping toward the window. Through the curtains, we could see headlights sweeping wildly across the driveway, illuminating the house in harsh staccato bursts. They're here, Jake breathed, panic seizing his features. We don't have much time. Who's here? Daniel demanded, rising unsteadily to his feet. The police? Rick. Worse, Jake replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The people Rick works for. They're coming to tie up loose ends. The headlights outside grew brighter, casting eerie shadows across the living room walls. The sound of tires screeching against gravel sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through my veins. My hands trembled as I clutched the satchel Jake had given me, its weight suddenly feeling unbearable. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where could we go? We were trapped. Everyone move. Sarah barked, snapping us out of our paralysis. Her voice was sharp and commanding, cutting through the chaos like a lifeline. Upstairs now. Without questioning her, we obeyed. Daniel led the way, his face pale but resolute, while Jake brought up the rear, glancing nervously over his shoulder. As we reached the staircase, the front door burst open with a deafening crash. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house, accompanied by low, menacing voices. They're inside, Jake whispered, panic lacing his words. We need to barricade ourselves. Sarah grabbed a nearby chair and shoved it under the doorknob of the master bedroom, reinforcing it as best she could. Meanwhile, I frantically scanned the room for anything that might serve as a weapon, a lamp, a fire extinguisher, anything. Daniel pulled open the closet, rummaging through boxes until he found an old baseball bat tucked away in the corner. This will have to do, he muttered, gripping it tightly. His knuckles turned white as he positioned himself near the door, ready to defend us if necessary. Jake crouched beside me, his eyes wide with fear. Emma, listen carefully, he said urgently. That satchel contains everything we need to expose Rick, the financial records, emails, even photos of him meeting with his contacts. If they get their hands on it, we're dead. You have to protect it no matter what. I nodded, though my heart pounded so hard I could barely hear his words. Protect it how? Against who? The intruders downstairs were already pounding on doors, their shouts growing louder as they systematically searched each room. We can't stay here, Sarah said, her voice trembling but determined. There's a window in the bathroom, it leads to the roof. From there, we can climb down to the backyard and make a break for the woods. It's too risky, Daniel argued, his grip tightening on the bat. They'll see us before we even reach the tree line. Do you have a better idea? Sarah shot back, her tone icy. Because sitting here waiting for them to find us isn't exactly a winning strategy. She had a point. Reluctantly, Daniel nodded, and together we moved toward the adjoining bathroom. The small space felt suffocating as we huddled around the narrow window, listening to the muffled sounds of destruction below. Whoever these people were, they weren't holding back. One at a time, Sarah instructed, pushing the window open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the faint scent of pine. She went first, climbing onto the sloped roof with surprising agility. Once she was safely perched, she signaled for Jake to follow. As Jake disappeared through the opening, the bedroom door shuddered violently. Someone or something was trying to force their way in. Panic surged within me, making it difficult to breathe. Hurry, Daniel urged, helping me scramble onto the roof. The tiles were slick with dew, threatening to send me sliding into the abyss below. I clung to the edge, my fingers digging into the rough surface as I struggled to maintain my footing. Behind me, Daniel climbed out last, just as the bedroom door finally gave way. A loud crash reverberated through the house, followed by angry shouts. One of the intruders spotted us immediately, raising a gun and firing a shot that whizzed past my ear, embedding itself in the siding above. "Go!" Daniel yelled, shoving me forward. I stumbled toward the edge of the roof, where Sarah and Jake were already descending a rickety trellis attached to the side of the house. Adrenaline propelled me downward, my legs burning as I half climbed, half fell to the ground. Once all four of us were safely on solid earth, we sprinted toward the dense forest bordering our property. Branches clawed at our faces and clothes as we pushed deeper into the darkness, the distant glow of flashlights fading behind us. But we didn't stop, not until we reached a secluded clearing miles away from the house. Breathing heavily, we collapsed onto the damp grass, our bodies shaking from exertion and fear. For several minutes, no one spoke. All that could be heard was the rustling of leaves overhead and the occasional hoot of an owl. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "We can't go back home. They'll be watching us." Daniel exchanged a glance with Jake, then turned to me. "Emma, give me the satchel." I hesitated, clutching it protectively. "Why?" "Because I know someone who can help," he replied, his tone firm but gentle. "An old friend from college, he's a journalist. If anyone can blow this story wide open, it's him." I hesitated again, torn between trust and doubt. Could we really rely on someone else after everything that had happened? But looking into Daniel's eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in weeks: sincerity. Whatever mistakes he'd made, whatever secrets he'd kept, he was fighting for us now. Reluctantly, I handed over the satchel. He took it carefully, cradling it like a fragile treasure. "Thank you," he murmured, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "For believing in me, even when I didn't deserve it." Over the next few days, we stayed hidden, moving from one safe location to another as Daniel worked tirelessly to contact his friend. When the journalist finally arrived, he listened intently to our story, poring over the contents of the satchel with growing horror. By the time he left, promising to publish everything he'd uncovered, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in what felt like forever. Weeks later, the truth came out. Rick and his accomplices were arrested, their crimes exposed in excruciating detail across national headlines. Our names were cleared, though the scars left behind would take far longer to heal. In the aftermath, our family began piecing itself back together. Trust was rebuilt slowly, brick by painstaking brick. It wasn't easy, and it never would be, but we had survived. Together. And sometimes, late at night, when the world seemed quiet enough to forget the chaos we'd endured, I'd catch Daniel watching me with a look of profound gratitude. As if he still couldn't believe I'd stood by him when everything fell apart. "I love you," he'd whisper, pulling me close. "I love you too," I'd reply, meaning every word. Because despite everything, I knew one thing for certain: love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing to fight, for each other, for forgiveness, for a future worth fighting for. And in the end, that was enough.